Hello, everyone. Welcome to Plenary 1 of the International Safety at Sea Conference. My name is Fiona Lowe, and I'll be your host for today. This conference is part of the International Safety at Sea Week, an annual event organized by the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore as part of its commitment to promote safety at sea. This year, we're heartened to have over 900 participants from more than 70 countries joining us, with key decision makers from governments around the world, as well as representatives from across different sectors of the maritime industry. Thank you all for joining us, and welcome back if you've also logged in for our opening session yesterday. To begin today's session, I would like to invite Captain Vibas Garg, Director, Global Head of Safety and Quality, Wallam Group, to deliver the first presentation on Dangerous Goods, the bane of box ship safety. Captain Vibas, please.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this plenary. I thank MPA in giving us an opportunity to speak on this platform. And my topic, as you can see, is about the dangerous goods, bane of safety, I call it, in the box ship trade. Container safety is a broad subject, and these here are some of the main areas of concern. We have seen an exponential growth in the size of container vessels, up to 24,000 TEU. Do we have the right firefighting systems on these ships? Do we have the crew who are properly trained to fight the fires on these ships? I think David here, who is on the panel, will be able to throw more light on this. But to me, it does appear that we need to have some changes. And the boxes we use today are of the same design and construction since when I joined SEA, or even before, and that's been some time. The problem that we had with the gross weight seems to have been solved. It's working well at some ports. But the most concerning of all the issues, as I said at the start, is, and it's the feature of this presentation, is the misdeclaration of goods. It's often amplified by poor decisions and practices relating to packaging, packing, segregation, and securing. A 2018 estimate puts the quantity at 5,000 TEUs of misdeclared dangerous cargo loaded every day, which is nearly 4% of the total loaded. These are just three of the major catastrophes over the last 10 years. There were several before this: Yantan Express, APL Vancouver, ER Kobe, KMTC Hong Kong, Grande America, etc. The list can go on and on and on. 56 reported fires between 2000 and 2015, a total loss of $1 billion US. Between 2015 and 19, the hull damage on 29 known claims exceeds $189 million. Current statistics show a serious fire occurs every 30 days. And if you take the near misses into account, the figure is closer to one a week, which has to be doused by the crews. Maersk Honum, which is out here on the picture, showed that the current cargo screening process is not good enough to avoid the misdeclaration by shippers. MSC Flamina, also here on the picture, has shed light on the need for better communication and information sharing across all parties in the supply chain when transporting dangerous goods. Express Pearl, that was discussed yesterday as well in the opening plenary. The claims are estimated to exceed Wakashio. That was a disaster, very recent. So what have we learned from these frequent disasters? Are we getting better at preventing them? Sadly, no. Requirements for special packaging and stuffing, availability of suitable stowage and an extra surcharge, these are all barriers that motivate the shippers for fraudulent misdeclarations of dangerous cargoes. And there is a good chance of getting away with it. So behaviors don't change. With so many players in the trade, another problem is the slot agreements in place between carriers. where no information is being exchanged on what cargo is in carrier A's box that is put on carrier B's ship. Proper shipping names are concealed. For example, once fraud is put in motion by declaring, say, calcium hypochlorite as calcium chloride, or whitening powder, or water treatment compound, the perpetrators then try to cover their tracks in the supply chain, which has numerous players, making it difficult to detect. These perpetrators have little regard for the carrier which may stow this container incorrectly and suffer a catastrophic fire or even loss of life out at sea. I suspect a SOLAS amendment on this is inevitable one day. Personally, I would welcome the prospect of bringing corporate manslaughter charges against these shippers that misdeclare cargoes leading to fatalities. What the carriers, the terminal operators, and freight forwarders need to know is what is the content of the box they are shipping. And then we go into the traceability. This involves tracing a digital item in the declaration, but also the physical goods in the box. Proper checks in the booking process will identify discrepancies between the final bill of lading, the draft bill of lading, and the booking documentation. A Know Your Customer process will identify dubious shippers. Above all, truth, trust, and transparency must guide all involved. There is need for all involved in the supply chain to have a realistic perception of risk and a responsible attitude towards liability. Carriers have attempted to resolve this problem. Penalties up to $35,000 or more have been imposed on shippers over the last few years. But do they really work? Do they change the behaviors? Some carriers have incorporated more inspections to ensure the cargo is correctly stuffed, latched, secured, contents match descriptions. Carriers with a larger footprint in the supply chain are using technology more effectively in the booking process and training the booking staff. Simply restricting the carriage of goods is not a viable option. Calcium hypochlorite has to be carried. We all know that. While fundamental nexus is between the carriers and the cargo interests, there is also a need for competent authorities and enforcement agencies to step up and take up the responsibilities, and not just expect the industry to sort out the problems. The IMO mandated inspection program is not followed through with sufficient rigor, and that weakens every part of the industry. It not only adds uncertainty to the carrier, but increases complacency for the cargo interests. If you don't get caught by the speed camera, you're not in trouble. That's what you think. In many parts of the world, there is no legislation to enforce packing rules, and there is no auditing or enforcement. Governments expect the industry to look after itself. We need more physical witnessing of the cargoes being manufactured, tested, packed into the containers to complement the digital documentation, planned as well as random unannounced visits. We can employ external agencies or softwares to carry out the KYC due diligence checks. In this day and age, we should take a parallel from the financial industry and be able to better establish and support the KYC principles that would flag the pop-up shipping companies as potentially risky ones. It would be beneficial if identification of rogue shippers could be shared between carriers, though antitrust laws does prevent that from happening today. And then all booking staff and agents, including those who are on the non-DG booking desk, I feel they must be trained well, and they should be able to identify the fraudulent shippers, and they should understand why we have to be careful with the dangerous goods declaration. This will spot the red flags of potential fraudulent misdeclarations. And then the CTU code, which has been in place since 2014, we can think about making that mandatory. The rogue shippers should be penalized more heavily, but I feel without cargo verification, penalties are a blunt tool. They are unlikely to change the attitude of any rogue shipper who will still bet on evading the net. At the end of the day, locks are always made for honest folks. Shipping containers often carry little to no indication of their specific contents. At best, a product code is scanned, traced, managed by silo data systems, which rarely interoperate with the data systems managed by other stakeholders along the connected value chain. And then there is an industry-wide reliance for dangerous good shipments in the Dangerous Good Declaration, which is the locus of all critical information and warning, rather than the use of the bill of lading, which should be the main document to convey the necessary and critical safety information. These issues regarding sharing of information and authentic documentation can be resolved using technology available today. Blockchain and distributed ledger technology can support in addressing the issues by providing more visibility of the activities and networks engaged in transportation of dangerous goods. I'm a tanker man, having spent most of my sailing days on tankers. In the tanker industry, the reactions and regulations are swift after a disaster. Torrey Canyon, Exxon Valdez, Erika, Prestige. All these have gone a long way in making the industry much safer over the last few decades. One of the driving factors has been the onus of self-management. SIRE and TMSA initiatives from OCIF and a similar one, the Right Ship for Bulkers that Steen spoke about yesterday. I believe that unless there is pain, you will not have safe behaviors coming into place. So we need a body like OCIF for the container vessels, set some standards for the industry, then enforce them through third-party inspectors and auditors to achieve an acceptable rating for shippers as well as carriers. It may be a wishful thought I will leave you with, but as a risk manager, I can tell you that unless you face a commercial loss, behaviors will not change. I'm not talking about the good operators here, but it just takes a rotten few in the basket to have these disasters. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Vibas. Next, I would like to call upon Mr. David Townsend, Principal Fire Investigator, Andrew Moore and Associates Limited, to deliver the presentation on Fire on Container Vessels. Are we sailing blissfully into catastrophe? Mr. Townsend, please.
I will try to allude in these next 10 minutes to these titles in the contents, but much of that will come up also in our plenary discussion, the panel discussion after. We are all familiar with the great risk of fire to the container shipping industry, especially to fully laden ships at sea and in port. Today I'd like to ponder that risk, taking into account the much larger vessels in the modern fleet. We can think about that risk in the light of three recent and widely reported incidents: Express Pearl, KMTC Hong Kong, and Ocean Trader. They and their cargoes were victims of fire. They are not protagonists. They and other images are here only for illustration. Many are acutely aware of past and current trends and issues which frequently foretell of disasters to come. Of great assistance when trying to get a message across is visualization, actual events. These three chosen vessels provide that service to me now. Imagine each in a major port or terminal with ships made fast either side and opposite, with vast terminal storage only a crane's length away, with, at the most, 2 or 3 fire engines on site, and, at the most, 2 or 3 local public fire service vehicles a full 10 minutes ride away, and backup that is much further. Now imagine a 23,000 plus TEU ship. What is the scale up? Express Pearl was not fully loaded. A 23,000 TEU vessel is more than 8 times the size. That is 8 times the fire loading, 8 times scale up. In fire is beyond imagination, and it is also beyond effective control. I talked about visualization. For Express Pearl, the visualization there on the image you can see is the radiant heat. Radiant heat from a fire is an extremely significant part of the process in fire spread. For KMTC Hong Kong, the visualization is its explosion projection. Look at the height of the burning projectile on the left image there. It is higher significantly higher than the length of the vessel. There is also port and starboard distribution of burning fire debris. For ocean trader, our visualization is explosion and port risk. Note the port starboard fire debris spread here is also the same as the length of the vessel. And that burning debris, as we can see from the top right image, it reached the dockside storage. In yellow on the left image there is an overlay of a 400-meter ship to scale. Note the height. It is not just a question of the increased fire loading and size of the vessel. The height at a dockside also increases the chance of spread and risk beyond current measures. We know that due to the sheer size of the modern fleets, there are problems with salvage and other response services. The same applies to fire. Port infrastructure has not adjusted with ship size changes. Obstructions and increased risk of fire spread must be reconsidered. Now let's look at our visualizations in terms of the Express Pearl and Ocean Trader in a current port. Our visualization for Express Pearl was the radiation risk, the heat of the radiation. On port, at port, that radiation heat will reach current dockside storage. Ocean Trader, we know already that reached the current levels and dynamics of dockside storage. Now let's put these onto a larger vessel, our 400-meter there overlaid in yellow. And the radiation is probably my greatest concern, is absolutely effective and strong enough with a major fire to reach current dockside storage. The explosion risk also will substantially reach that storage. I've not, in that image, actually exaggerated too much. Of course, with an explosion risk, it's going to be one or two, hopefully at the most, containers to erupt. But if they are deep within the fire, they are going to push more products out, port and starboard and above. Let's put this in another port. And here the dynamics of the port gives a slightly dead-end condition there, which will limit the access for tugs. In this port, the orientation of the dockside storage is end-on to the risk, which in my scenario is the ship. That will make that dockside storage more vulnerable. Fire risk assessment must be holistic and all-encompassing. The risk is primarily the container unit. The container unit has not changed significantly since inception. They are the eggs in bigger and bigger baskets, but each of these eggs is a fire load. Self-sufficient fire casualty, this is a term not devised by me. It is a good term and a logical aim, and it takes us back to the origins of fire and fire safety, which is at sea. But it's being applied only to the ship, not to the container. It is certainly laudable, but it only applies to that certain class, size of vessel, and of course it's not retrospective. Fire solutions, all fire, land or sea, will always use these standard terminology. It's all about prevention, alert, suppression, and containment. It applies to all risks. Solutions at source, in this context, being the container, potentially, the same terminology applies. Prevention, detection, suppression, containment can be achieved in each TEU. We know that the fixes are not easy, quick, or cheap. We also know that there are many organizations and individuals in the industry doing what they can in their own fields of influence. We simply ask that others listen to them and to us and heed the warnings. I asked Are we sailing blissfully to catastrophe? Blissfully? Of course not. That is glib, and I am not so cynical. But there is still significant risk to be addressed, and one key risk is the container itself. To achieve a self-sufficient casualty, this must be addressed. This is where we are, and this is myself. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend and Captain Vibas, for setting the stage for our panel discussion next on Safer Carriage of Goods. What more must be done? Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, please note that you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to pose questions to our panelists. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Captain Kunal Nakra, Deputy Director, Transport Safety Investigation Bureau, Ministry of Transport, Singapore. Joining him on the panel, we have our speakers, Captain Vibas Garg, Director, Global Head of Safety and Quality, Wallum Group. Mr. David Townsend, Principal Fire Investigator, Andrew Moore and Associates Limited, as well as Mr. Chia An An, Director, Shipping, Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, and Captain Lee Chi Seong, Fleet Director, Pacific Carriers Limited. Captain Kunal, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Fiona. A very good day to all of you. Despite the disruptions in our daily lives, goods have been carried by sea like yesteryears regardless. Most of them have reached their destinations, while some of them have perished. Others have washed up ashore. Many have caused catastrophic damage to property and environment and resulted in loss of lives. It's a very sobering thought that I am leading this plenary today with, and I'm thankful to both the keynote speakers for sharing their respective experience with us, primarily on the exponential growth of the box ship sizes and their potential to cause catastrophic damage. I'm extremely honored to be sharing the stage with them, together with two other industry personalities who need no further introduction, Captain Lee and Mr. Anand from the MPA. Captain Lee is from the Pacific Carriers Limited Fleet Director. I must admit I could not have asked for a better lineup than these gentlemen, because the topic is vast. At the same time, we will try to dissect whatever little we can in this time that has been allocated to us. We have come across various literature that seems to suggest that container sizes are growing at a rapid pace, which is a concern, no doubt, as seen in the second presentation by Mr. Townsend. To kick off this plenary, I would like to request for the survey results to be brought out, which the audience might recall answering at the time of registration, to try and understand the scope of where we are at today. So could we have this survey responses on the screen, please? Thank you. So the intent of this question was to understand, are we going beyond the sizes that we can manage, we being the industry? Are we prepared in terms of our processes, in terms of our systems to manage these ships? And please don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that bigger ships should not be there in the industry. It is entirely to understand what does the industry feel in terms of being able to manage and mitigate the risks. I see an interesting spread, though I would have thought the sweet spot lies between the 10 and 15,000 TEU. Larger percentage of our respondents feel that existing systems and procedures can cope. David, if I could briefly turn to you, are you surprised to see this result? What do you make of the response, and what do you think the respondents could be feeling when they responded with this?
Well, I think it's likely that many respondents will be influenced by the current issue in misdeclaration, so that may sway the figures. However, I would emphasize there are always trends. There will always be fires. The figure for 3,000 TEU, around 11%, that may be a reflection of some inherent distrust of the box ship system generally, and I would expect a figure in that region. The larger figure, the 35% of everything's okay, I think that probably reflects, and quite rightly, a reasonable confidence in the larger carrier fleets. So of great interest to me are the other sectors who are worried by the scale of things from the point of 10,000 units upwards. So this concern has been with many for a considerable number of years.
But do you think the industry has come to terms with the elephant in the room, the smaller ships, that they are fine and we can easily scale up and not be worried? Is that where the bigger problem lies?
I think that's unlikely, but I hope there is not complacency, but there may be some surrender to fate where the manifest cannot be fully trusted.
Thank you, David. Captain Lee, I'm certain you've seen your share of incidents in your vast career. What are your thoughts on this survey response? What do you think? Is the appetite of the industry, does it resonate with what you have experienced?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kunal. I have the unfortunate experience of going through some of these fires myself. I think one of the cases mentioned in Captain Viba's slides was one of the ships that I was handling when we are managing the CMT. The unfortunate thing is that I think I'm happy to see the result of the poll, because I think depending on the profile of the respondents, those who are more familiar with container operations, I think they realize that the issue is not with the current system and the process, but it's more on the compliant part of it. So to me, if the box has been staffed correctly, declared correctly, landed up on the ship, and the chief officer stowed the ship correctly, correct segregations, and I would think that the fire would not be started on the ship. Some of those cases that I have experienced are actually more on the wrong declaration or non-declaration of the boxes. So with regards to the training of the crew, I think to put off a container fire, I've seen this, it is not even close to what the shore firefighters can do on the ship. One of the cases that we have, even the shore firefighters are unable to manage it. So I think the training, yes, we can handle small fires, but once the fire started in a container, I think it's not so easy. And then coming back to the SOLAS equipment, over the years, we have actually implemented quite a few additional firefighting equipment that which somehow we can contain the fire within the zone or cargo hold, but to put off the fire is not an easy task. So to me, I think these survey results is quite aligned to my thoughts, actually.
Yeah, you're right in the sense that we cannot possibly do anything other than ensure safe carriage. But at some point along the way in the logistics supply chain, compliance at various levels is where the issue lies. And we're probably going to talk about that. There's a question from the audience as well. We'll take it on. But from a flag state's perspective, do you also see similar trends in terms of are the trends that you assess, are they aligned with what the survey results are showing, saying that we can manage those risks and therefore we are happy to have the bigger sizes of ships?
Yeah, thank you, Captain Kunal. So from my perspective is that in terms of the risk of the physical size of the vessel, I'm thinking of we can approach and analyze the situation using the risk matrix model, where you have consequences and severity at one axis, and the other axis is the probability and likelihood, right? So if let's say we talk about consequences, if let's say there is a fire on board the ships, and if the fire is not mitigated at the earliest possible, the consequences of the risk, it can spread. The example, the fire is cargo hold, it can spread to the on deck and even go to the accommodation block, and towards the end, master might need to abandon the ships. So regardless of the size, if this is not managed properly, the consequences of severity may be the same. And let's say we talk about likelihood. The way how I see is that the bigger the ship is, you might tend to carry more possibility undeclared or misdeclaration dangerous good cargo. So with a more undeclared cargo, dangerous good cargo, you might load in the wrong position, and where the way I see is that the risk might be high. Yeah. So, okay, in terms of flat state perspective, I would like to also stress on, I would like to put this physical size apart. I would also like to see the other equation where it's also important, play a very important part on risk and managing the risk of these container ships. That is the ship managers, the ISM company, as well as the master and his crew, right? So in general terms, the company should have a very robust procedure in place to manage the risk of the vessel, which I heard sometimes some company have implement or set up a dangerous goods department by itself, just to manage dangerous goods, right? So in terms of the ships, the master and the crew should also be well versed of the dangerous goods, IMDG codes requirement, and also, of course, the training part as well. They can go into a very specific training or tackle of dangerous good cargo or fire on board the container ships. And the emergency preparedness, which the company as well, the ships need to take care of that as well. I would like to go more into that, illustrated one simple scenario which could happen on board the ship. Let's say one container ship is a carrier cargo operation at terminal. And what happened is that towards the end of the cargo operation, the chief officer found that there is a few dangerous goods cargo have been loaded wrongly at the, example, cargo hold in front of the accommodation block. So what he should do? He will take some actions, and towards the end, he should inform the master, right? And when the master being notified, as usual, the master should take action where he should do the reassessment, use the professional judgment to analyze the risks that have been wrong cargo have been loaded in the container, and where he should probably contact the company as well, or his charterer or port terminals. And if let's say he assesses that the risk is too high, most likely it will be that because there is a really wrong cargo loaded in the wrong place, he should normally he should not sail the ship, right? He should mitigate the risk either by restore the cargo or change or remove the cargo from the ship, if let's say require. That is where I'm thinking of during such time, he should utilize the ISM code into his authority, where the ISM clause, section 5.2, is stated that the master have the responsibility and authority to make a decision when it comes to the safety and pollution on board the ship. And also request for any necessary assistance required from shore, right? So, and the other part is that from the company, what a company will do when he receives such a notification, he should give full support, especially the designated person ashore, where it's also stated in ISM clause section 4. He should give a full support and resources to the master when the master requests for the assistance. And also you have a direct link to the top management where the decision can make quickly and assist the master to mitigate the risk. Let's come back to flat state as well. MPA is also fully supportive or will render all necessary support if, let's say, we are being notified of certain crisis on board by master or by the company. So we will even, if possible, we can even set up the crisis management team to manage the situation and tackle the risk at the earliest possible to prevent further damage to the ship and environment. Yeah, thanks. That's my point of view from flat state. Thank you.
Thanks, Anand.
Yeah.
No, very valid points. I think responsible flags naturally expect their ships and ship owners and managers to manage their risks correctly. Captain Vibhas, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, Kunal, I'm watching this with interest. For me, you know, as you said, really size doesn't matter here, because whether it's a 3,000 TEU or a 25,000 TEU ship, once a container is packed with dangerous stuff, not declared properly, it can find its place anywhere, right? So in my presentation, that's what I was insisting on, that it's about making sure that you do not have a box which carries lithium batteries misdeclared or calcium hypochlorite misdeclared on board a ship.
Yeah.
And then coming to Anand's point, and with all due respect, I'm aware of the ISM code and the way that it should be functioning. But let's face reality in the commercial world. And can you imagine a master holding back a ship with a tight schedule? I mean, we don't even get the container manifests in time. So if a ship is there for 5 hours, we are about to leave, and that's when chief officer gets to know what is in his containers. So when it comes to the commercial reality, we have a situation where it becomes a little difficult to comply and exercise master's authority. What he sees in the BL is not really what actually exists. And that's why I feel that this needs to be taken, this responsibility of making sure that the container is stuffed properly before it reaches that ship, whether 3,000 or 10,000 or 23,000, before it is on board.
Right. So naturally the intent is to prevent it way before it enters into the shipboard supply chain logistically, upstream from the time that the container is stuffed. We'll come to that. I think we've got a few important points to talk on that, because I agree that the size of the ship doesn't really matter from a risk perspective. You can have one container misdeclared and you can have an incident size of the ocean trader, or you can have one container, you can have the incident size of APL Vancouver or the others. I mean, and like what Captain Vibhas has mentioned, it just takes one or two rogue players or dirty eggs to cause that whole thing to derail. But Anand, you mentioned about the developments at IMO briefly, that there should be certain processes in place as far as the ship owning company is concerned. From a regulatory standpoint, other than what flag state imposes, which is essentially what the IMO has put in place, are there changes being done at the IMO as we speak on managing these risks? Not the shipper's angle yet, because that's another topic which is quite huge, but on from a flag's compliance point of view.
Yeah, Captain Kunal. Okay, from the international front, MPA fully support and also work closely with IMO in all the main committee and subcommittee meetings, and basically to just formulate the regulation and rules to ensure that it still remain relevant and effective for, especially for this case, carrying of dangerous good compliance. Yeah. So in fact, Singapore have submitted a paper, a new output proposal to MSC on amendment to Chapter SOLAS 2.2 and also FSS code on detection and fire compatibility and equipment to tackle the fire on deck as well and cargo hold for container ships. And this has been agreed in a recent MSC, where this paper had been pushed to the work plan for the subcommittee SSE, Ship System and Equipment Committee, where there will be a further deliberation on that. And I hope that there will be a new requirements and after deliberation come out soon. Yeah, yeah. And the other meetings that we're going to attend next week, basically is a carriage of cargo and containers, CCC. There is some subject that agenda that have been put in place for some proper declaration of cargo information, as well as minimize the risk with a proper storage of cargo. Yeah, this is in the agenda, as well as a revision of inspection program for containerized transport unit carrying of dangerous goods as well, on some structure or of the existing MSC Circular 1442, where they talk about inspection of the dangerous goods. And I know that there is 2 additional agenda where they talk about some fumigation of and safety of the inspection of the container.
Right, right.
So these a few things that we get involved, and we also participate in the correspondent group that will continue to give input,
Right.
with work together with industry. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I took your last point. You talk about the inspection of the containers as a part of the packing process, and taking a cue from what Captain Vibas had presented in his slide. Say a ship of 5,000 TEU carries about 750 TEU of DG. From what I can gather, there could be potentially 250 of those which are intentionally misdeclared, with the intention to slip past the net. I'm quite certain that many carriers would have processes in place to deter such declarations. Captain Lee, your experience, do you think it is quite common for carriers to have such things?
Yes,
How do carriers manage their own risk? I mean, assuming we've got the right container, we've got the right firefighting systems, how do the carriers make sure that those ones which statistically have proven to slip past the net do not get past?
Yeah, Kunal, good question. In fact, after each incident, we learn more from our mistake. I think Captain Vibas did mention about KYC. Knowing our customer, I think it is one of the most important things that we need to do. The example in the 90s when we had a serious fireworks fire on our ship. So what we did was we have actually started this Hazmat Department. Any new customers coming in to ship on our ship will be audited from the factory to the packing stage and to moving the container to the ship. So once they pass this audit, and every box that they're going to put on our ship will be surveyed. So actually, as a chief officer on a ship, he will get a picture of what is in the container. So this is one of the actions that we have taken after we learned from past incident that the fireworks was not properly packed and labeled. So we had a huge fire. So the other thing that one of the quite recent, about 2 years ago, big fire, the ship was burning for 11 days. It was really shocking to know that the cargo is actually dangerous cargo, but was not declared as dangerous cargo, right? So the ship's planner, what he does was he put this box in the non-DG cargo hold. You can imagine when the fire starts, there's actually no means to control the fire because it was loaded right in front of the engine room bulkhead without sprinkler system. So I think after the incident, we have actually imposed a very heavy penalty for misdeclaration. It's about 35,000. You are right, Captain Vibas. So, but of course, just by imposing this is not good enough. We need to spot check. So the headquarters in Europe, the DG desk actually uses some kind of intelligence to flag up potentially a rouge shipper. And once it's flagged out, and this shipment will be actually handled by the head office, not the regional office. Okay. The other things that we put in is actually additional firefighting equipment on the ship, which works out to be really effective. You know, a good example is just a very simple fire hose holder. When the fire started, right, you have 18, 20, 22 crew on the ship. If you do not have this holder, you need one man to hold this for boundary cooling for 24/7, depending how long the fire is burning. So we have put it as a standard item on our ships to have this fire hose holder. And you can imagine, you think that there are many fire hoses on the ship, right? But when there's fire across the whole bay or the whole cargo hold, you find that it's like spaghetti. The fire hose is running all over the place. So the other additional firefighting equipment that we put is actually a manifold distributor. So you have one hose coming in, you distribute to 6.
Yeah.
So you reduce the number of hoses.
Yeah.
So I think we shared this with quite a few forums, and many companies has also put this. And I think the hydro pan is something that is also very useful for container fire, to actually douse the fire in the container itself. So having said that, I still feel that, you know, the regulators, MPA just talked about it just now. If you look at cases coming out from the US, I think it's not so frequent, because the US Coast Guard has got the CFR Code 49 that actually covers the movement of dangerous cargo in all modes of transportation, and they are very strict about it. So yes, there's regulations, there's also compliance, and the enforcement as well. So I think these are some of the things that I feel that if we sincerely want to improve this track record on container fires, we need to look at the upstream before the box come to the ship, actually.
Certainly. I think there's absolute value in what you said. And taking cue from what you just mentioned about rogue shippers and assuming 10 carriers have processes in place, let's take a handful number. 10 carriers have processes in place. 6 of them have better processes to detect those rogue shippers. The shippers will still find ways to go to the remaining 4 to get the cargo across, because to them it is the bottom line. Getting the goods across is important. How they do it, it is for them to decide, and that's where my concern comes. I mean, you talked about AI and technology with the company in Europe that their desk detects these shippers. I think that's one of the questions that one of the audiences also asked. The declaration provided by the shippers is often incomplete or not correct. Can the shippers be held accountable for this? I mean, fining somebody is one point, and Captain Vibhas also mentioned about corporate manslaughter charges for shippers who willfully misdeclare, eventually cause loss of life. So, how do you propose this to be implemented from a practical standpoint? Do you think that across the carriers in the industry, can there be synergy in what one adopts, the others also adopt? Can there be a standardization of processes, or is that too difficult to achieve in terms of industry and trade practice?
Yeah, I think, Captain Kunal, I think the main liners, they all have pretty much the same processes. CINS is a platform where we report the incidents, but that's all. We just report the incidents. I think there should be a forum that not only just taking the data from incidents that happen, but also maybe suggesting solutions to solve the problem. The issue is actually they're all competing for the same business, right?
Right.
So yes, the major liners has got very robust process and SOP. Like you mentioned, those dangerous cargoes still need to be moved, right? So it will be ended up in some of those companies that does not have such a strong processes. So I still feel that we need, like I mentioned before, about the CFR 49, how the U.S. Coast Guard is imposing such documented regulations. How they inspect and how they check. I think that would probably can help to deter some of this shipper from bypassing all the rules and regulations.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's food for thought in terms of a regulatory ability to manage that risk. Captain Vibhas, what do you make of this? You talked about know your customer, know your clients. Naturally, regulations of every jurisdiction will differ. You can't possibly have the same level of regulations that the United States have in another country. But knowing your customer is probably a relatively simpler method of managing the risk. Do you think that is achievable?
I think, Kunal, we have to tighten the nose on these shippers. And as Captain Lee mentioned, in many countries, many parts of the world, this is not a practice, right? You have responsible shippers. But in some parts of the world, you have these pop-up shipping outfits who just kind of transport one cargo and then they disappear. And that's the cargo that is the rotten apple in the basket. Today, when we do business, I mean, would you do business after an OFAC check tells you that this company is sanctioned by USA, under sanctions? You will not. So you do your due diligence, you make sure that it's not on the OFAC list. And there are certain other processes by which you find the quality of the shipper. When we are making payments to vendors, we make sure that the bank accounts are authentic. There are a lot of checks and balances in doing business today. And if you take a parallel from the financial industry, KYC norm is a norm. It's absolutely unthinkable of not doing it. I mean, somebody I know is going through a KYC process in India, which is going to take 20 days before he can even start investing his money in the country. So it is a must. We have to do the KYC. The question is whether there is the will to do it. We have got the technology out there. If you can give sufficient training to the booking clerks, including the ones who are not on the DG desk, I'm sure they will be able to identify which are the customers who are reliable. And if they have the knowledge of the dangerous goods and their packing and stuff like that through a KYC process, you can take cargoes only from shippers who are on that list. And that's what I mean by tightening the noose. So if you actually start, so somebody said here that 6 out of 10 companies are doing this process, and they may not take those containers, but 4 would. Obviously, the shippers are going to go there, whichever way they find. But if you start spreading this around, and somehow the government makes it mandatory to have this process, otherwise you cannot trade in that part of the world, well, things will start changing. So I think KYC is something that should have been started yesterday. It should have been made mandatory. It's something which you have to have in place to identify your shippers, your manufacturers, whether you are getting money paid by the shipper's personal bank account, for example, or things like this. So that's what I feel about it.
I think we've got a few questions from the audience which are similar to the concerns that you've expressed in terms of shippers, and many of them are echoing the earlier question, what can be done about such shippers? But I think we've heard the KYC part, we've heard the upstream regulatory part. David, I recall you mentioned in one of your slides of fixing the container. Now, fixing the container can be perceived as the solution should the shipper's angle slip past. That means the rogue shipper still managed to get that box on board, and then you try and fix the container so that in case you get it, you try and mitigate the risk and minimize the damage. But that, do you think, is possible in the immediate term, mid-term, long-term? Because I mean, containers have been, Captain Vivas mentioned, have not changed since when he started sailing. And I'm not going to go into that, how far that was, because that's clearly not what we're here to discuss. But do you think that is something possible in the coming 5 years, say?
Yes, absolutely. Fire risk assessment is all about trying to achieve a risk which is as low as reasonably practicable. What that means is it also takes into account the industry needs. It's not a question of simply recommending or making any items or products fireproof, fire resistant. The cost is prohibitive. It has to take into account the business. So with, let's say, fixing the containers, there are things that can be done relatively quickly. Further down the road in the 5 to 10 year scheme, we would look at a more technical work, such as monitoring of each for gas detection, heat detection. Heat detection is done already with reefers, and can be done and constantly monitored too. Short-term fixes are not total fixes, but they reduce the risk. For example, one of the risks on containers now is the timber flooring. As the fire progresses upwards and outwards, it's eating away through the floors. And the boundary protection, tug protection, will not reach that. I'm talking about deck cargo. When the flooring is replaced, an intumescent mesh is tacked to the underside, that will provide the protection. That will form a char underneath any container to which heat gets to, and that will reduce the spread. That's relatively quick in the scheme of things, and it's relatively cheap. Much longer term would be to increase the change, not the fundamental construction of the container, of course, because the industry relies on those dimensions. But you can avoid, and I've seen, and I must say, by the way, I've seen many magnificent efforts by crews on ships, on container ships. There's some really good effort made. And when it's against them, it's usually due to the cargo. But at the moment, the hydro pen, for example, is a good example of a add-on. But how many of those will be on each vessel? Would it be one per bay? It's one per ship. And that item is going to be difficult to attach to where certain lashings are. It won't reach 30-meter height, which we have on the bigger ships, on the deck cargo. And it cannot be used in between. Bays on 20 feet TEUs, because the door is hidden. It's a useful device, and it's probably quicker than the Lance, which is very manpower intensive. But these are all active items. Now, fire risk assessment will look for passive protection. And passive protection means it does not rely on the human element. It's there all the time. If it is the container that can be reduced its risk, then it's, in effect, it's retrospective, because as the containers are replaced by their age and condition, to buy a new container has to be of an enhanced standard, then eventually the risk of spread, not a fire starting, the risk of spread will be reduced. And it's the spread is the problem.
Yeah. No, you've made a valid point, because I just wanted to manage the expectations of the audience. We are not suggesting or implying that we should continue business as usual for shippers to continue to misdeclare cargoes and deal with the container. I think the point is that in case you do get those passes across the net, then the containers, fixing the container would help minimize the consequential damage that could occur. But you're right in terms of the equipment. They're active and they require to be operated. There are limitations. The investigation to Maersk Honam also identified the limitations of the mobile water monitor, which was over and above the SOLAS requirements. And it was not used. And it wasn't used because of other reasons. What we did identify was that it was actually not so convenient to use either. So by having all the bells and whistles, we may not be fully prepared to mitigate the risk. And going back to the risk tolerance level, that's what I come back to KYC part, and I like that the way it is being coined here with the banking industry. It becomes unthinkable for you to do business in any industry if you don't know who you're doing business with. So why hasn't the maritime industry embraced that process from a methodology point of view, that we are not going to do business with you if we don't know you, right? Simply put. I recall at the last year's Safety at Sea conference, I made a small point and I was told that that's a very valid point. Has the risk tolerance or the operating envelope of the industry becomes so diminished that we're willing to go down to levels saying that, fine, let's just continue as we are? And I think that's where Captain Vibhas also mentioned that should we be tackling or taking the bull by its horns and hit it where it hurts most? Don't take the cargo. Partially what Anand was trying to say, exercise overriding authority. He's also got the point that stop it, but he was going on the direction where you detect something. But I'm trying to say that why not get the shippers on board? And that's where I wanted to come to you, Captain Vibhas. You recall Steen mentioning about right ships processes at the opening ceremony. Do you think there is a role for the likes of CINS or the Global Shippers Forum to play a part in becoming something what RightShip is trying to do for the bulk carrier industry? That means you start putting in safety standards that we are and identify the tiers of shippers, for example. We assess, we sample, we detect, and we take it forward. Other than that, we don't take cargo on board, and let that become the expectation of the industry. Do you think that's possible?
I certainly do, Kunal. As I said to you, I have my knowledge of container industry is from when I have come ashore and managed the container vessels, and what I've read about it. I haven't sailed on container ships, but I know for a fact that the situation in the container industry is not the same as the tanker and the bulk industry. I mean, you've got many more players in the supply chain, and so it's definitely much more difficult to have an organized effort like the other industries. But when I was researching for this, and when I'm trying to focus on this problem that I discussed in my presentation, the first question that comes to my mind is that you have a clear problem statement here. Why can't the industry unite, the elements in the supply chain unite to solve this problem? And OCIMF was launched 50 years back. There was a problem with oil pollution. That was the motive. And then in the 90s, they realized that the safety is substandard. And then they introduced this wonderful SIRE concept. As Steen told you yesterday, around the same time, the bulk cargo owners decided to launch RightShip to collect data on the substandard shippers and cargo owners. And look where they are today. It has done a huge service to the industry. Tanker industry is far safer today with initiatives like SIRE and TMSA. And RightShip has done miracles in the bulk industry today. If you are a bulk carrier owner, you have to have a safety record good enough to be able to find business. Find business. And that's what I say. And that's what happens in the tanker industry. If you're not complying with the safety norms, you don't get business. You don't get chartered. Now, yes, there is also this question of 60% and 40%. 60% of the container tonnage is a member of CINS, the Container Incident Notification System. And they're all big time owners. And they understand this problem. And they meet 4 times a year and they discuss this issue. And they issue guidelines off and on. The last one they issued was about the seed cake carriage in containers and so on and so forth. But do they have the teeth? Do they have the necessary powers to enforce whatever they are issuing guidelines on? Even OCIMF issues guidelines. But then we in the tanker industry make sure that they are followed. And we go by them because we know that eventually, if we want to clear the requirements of our customers, we have to follow those. If you can somehow get the container industry to collaborate, and yes, of course, there is this Global Shippers Forum, but you must understand that as somebody asked the question, Asif asked this question, isn't that where the problem is coming from? So I feel that those who will have the solution or will have the motivation to create a solution are the ones who feel the pain the maximum.
The owners of the risk.
The owners of the risk. And who is that in this case? the carriers. And what is the body that they have today which can take some initiatives in this regard? SINs. But yes, there will be collaboration required across the industry. You will have to have the shippers taking part in it. You can easily set standards. You can, I mean, this was discussed by Captain Lee. You can have systems to audit. I'm not saying you have to audit all the millions of containers, but you can have a sampling process, a random, unannounced process that is kind of, it's encouraged by the governments and the bodies, which will make a change in the industry. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, we need somebody to vet the containers.
Somebody who's in a position to represent the collective carriers, for
Yes.
example. So you could, if you can have a SIRE inspector representing OCIMF, you could potentially have a inspector, a surveyor representing CINS, for example.
Yes.
There's an interesting question, I'd like to pull that on the screen. If a DG container comes with a certificate of inspection by a marine surveyor, everyone involved can know what the container has been packed and labeled correctly before it is picked up. Carriers can make this their own requirement at a cost to the shipper. How feasible would this be? So this question has a suggestion. At the same time, it has got a problem statement. So we just briefly talked about that. So SINs could possibly be somebody who takes on this responsibility. Naturally, the costs, there will be associated costs with it, but I'm quite certain the tanker industry costs associated eventually are managed somehow. It's not a deterrent. You want the tankers to be safe. You don't want oil-soaked birds sitting on a beach picked up by the media.
Exactly.
But burning containers do catch the media for the right and the wrong reasons as well. So
yeah, but at the end of the day, this cost has to get absorbed in the system. Otherwise, there is no trade for tankers. And so today, there is a vetting cost for getting the SAR inspectors. We bear it. It's the ship owner who bears the cost. But it has to be done. If you don't have a vessel which is acceptable to the OCIMF SAR system.
And that aligns with what
Out of
Steen
business.
talked about from the bulk carrier industry as well. And
Exactly.
if SINs is becoming a data point, a data repository, that's what RightShip was also looking at. They're looking at data.
Yep.
Now they have the data, they can execute this thing. But David, do you think that is a realistic possibility for the container industry to learn from, barring your container fixing suggestion? Is that something which can be achieved in today's day and age with technology? Taking evidence, sampling stuffed containers, what has been packed, so that a SIN surveyor can call up and say, okay, I need evidence of XYZ containers, let me have a look at it. Do you think that's possible?
Yes, and most or many shippers do provide also images and videos, or perhaps also, of the point of stuffing. But it's not compulsory, it's not done everywhere, and the likes of having a central body to monitor that the carriers all put into and fund, then that will obviously reduce costs. But remote monitoring is possible, easy. Everybody has a mobile phone in their pocket. To send a folder of progressive images of stuffing is also not high on the manpower problem at point of stuffing. And it seems entirely reasonable to me that, although the problem is, of course, the timescale of getting this information back to the ship and the manifest in time. But in principle, if such a scheme were to be generally accepted, that you don't get, the shipment is not accepted if you don't send these files and folders. They're not all going to be examined. They'll be examined randomly, and that can be done after the ship sails. So it doesn't delay the sale of the ship, but it's a condition of shipping that such validation, visual validation of shipping, of the stuffing, is provided, and that includes the packaging and the dunnage, etc. And it will help. It will help. It's not going to deter extremely rogue traders. But having a system of monitoring, physical monitoring by surveyors, and then certification of that, my worry would be it then becomes another document chase.
Right.
And it's not then a positive evidence of it really is okay. It needs a lot of trust. And in fire investigation, there is an exceedingly high amount of document chase and examination. Better for me as a fire expert that the hardware is more robust.
Certainly, and to that, I think there's a question which you might be in a position to answer, and I'll ask for that to be put on the screen. Why is fire and explosion analysis not part of a formal assessment that accompanies the construction of each ship? And again, partly maybe Anand can help here. Primarily tankers and vessels that carry dangerous goods. Understand that blast radius, accommodation survivability, etc., will bring a perspective of how organizations can plan for safety. So construction stage, again, the hardware. Could we have that question? Yeah, the question's on the screen. So why is fire explosion analysis not a part of formal assessment that accompanies the construction of each ship for dangerous goods in general? And again, Anand or David, you feel free to chime in if you think you might be able to offer some insights from a David?
Well, I think on that basis, with dangerous goods, we're looking at relatively small units and containerized units. We're not looking at the whole vessel. I don't think it's quite fair to compare it with tanker or oil carrier, chemical carriers, gas carriers, which would, I assume, would have such analysis.
Right.
I do have trust in the industry as a whole. I have a trust in marine architecture and the design and control of these. I have trust in the codes, safety at sea codes, etc., and basically in crews and operators. But it's very reliant on everything being absolutely right.
Perfect.
There's no leeway for, or very little leeway for error or items missing. For example, with the training is an issue. If the training for certain officers in the, say, the CO2 or the high-X foam system is not up to scratch, then that's a critical moment. And I think we all know of cases where that has been a significant element of the fire. I certainly have. But as far as I'm aware, such officers don't receive regular training in actual actuation of these things, and that is critical.
Yeah, that's the point Captain Lee also made, that training of ship's crew, they're not intended to, they're intended to navigate the ship, have the cargo operations, place A to place B, perform the work, and they're not firefighters per se. And unlike shore-based firefighters whose day in, day out job is purely to fight fires and nothing else. I mean, of course, they do other rescue operations as well, but purely from a firefighting perspective. And I think there will always be that limitation for the ship's crew to fight fires. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that fixing the upstream problem is where we need to look at, and what Captain Vibar said earlier. Captain Lee?
Yeah, Kunal, I just want to touch on actually the firefighting part. You know, once the fire is started, to kill the fire, if it's become uncontrollable, it's very difficult. I think the containment of the fire, the 2-3 experience that I have, is more important than anything else. If it started in a cargo hold, CO2 will protect. Hopefully, whatever that happens, you just burn off. Just one cargo hold damage. If it is happening on the deck, isolate, make sure boundary cooling, the water curtain spraying is okay. So just let it burn off. The last incident I have is actually 11-day burning off. You know, there's nothing very much even with shore firefighters can do. So to me, I think the equipment, which David talked about, and the training of the crew, if there's a fire, do you really want to go into the container and kill the fire, or just let it burn out? So I think the equipment that we have to think about is it's more about containing the fire rather than actually killing the fire. The other experience that we realize is that, you know, if the cargo is not declared as a dangerous cargo, right? So as I mentioned, they will put it into any cargo hold, some non-DG cargo hold. So I had a chat with An. Actually, I think going forward, when we construct a container ship, is it possible to ensure all the cargo holds are actually safe to carry dangerous cargo, rather than alternate cargo holds and all this?
Sure.
So I think when this is in place, then we manage some of the risk of misdeclaration or non-declaration of dangerous cargo.
Sure. Anand, your views?
Yeah, I think go back to the previous earlier question as well, the risk assessment and construction. Of course, this actually is in one of our earlier what I say our proposal for new output in IMO, right? Where that is where like Captain Lee saying that if let's say there's an assessment and member states have been discussed and proposed that there is a mandatory to have a CO2 system in all cargo holds, then you implement and come up with the rules. And beside that, there is also some discussion on flooding the cargo hold, total flooding the cargo hold, right? I think sometimes there is I've seen some fire, someone have flood the whole cargo hold to extinguish the so this have been discussed. There's a possibility also one of the output that can come up with a new requirement where when you want to do this, you got to make sure that your construction, in terms of construction of the ship, your watertight bulkhead, your transverse bulkhead should be able to withstand the water pressure, because some of the ship might not design for that, right? Yeah. So there's a few things that is part of risk assessment or input that which can be deliberated in IMO, various member states, and probably the new regulation will come out.
Fair enough.
Thanks.
No, I think that's a valid point. We have just about time for a live poll question, and if I could invite the audience to try and answer this question, we'll take that before we end our session. In your opinion, who should do more to address the risks associated with the safe carriage of cargo? So now that's a very subjective question, so please use your best assessment to come up with the answer. I don't think we are prepared to see what anyone comments on, but it'll be a good fit. Let's see how the poll results come out. I think we've done a fairly good job in trying to set the stage right. So the audience would be able to see the results. Naturally, there is a growing percentage expectation from shippers, but I think to be fair, before I give my views, perhaps the panelists, your views, starting from Anand, your views on what you make of the survey? Yeah,
okay. From my perspective, I think flat state perspective, what I can see for the last 1 hour or so, our discussion, lively discussion, we see that I can conclude that there is a lot of work still need to be done, right, to ensure a safe carriage of cargo. And of course, from the poll here, we can see that number one is the shippers, almost 50% that where we need to address on the shippers. That means the upstream side to bring a correct cargo information into the ship before anything happens on board. But let's not forget about the whole entire dangerous good carriage supply chain, right? There are still many stakeholders as well. which involve port terminals, charterer, owners, all the way to the ships and master. So, and also customer society as well. So every single stakeholder, I'm sure there is a responsibility of they have parts to play to ensure it's safe, right? It can stop at any location, whoever can detect it, and to stop the catastrophe from happen. So for me as a flag state, I would like to encourage every stakeholder, if possible, or especially the SRS operator or the master, to continue to review to ensure that they have any gaps in between their procedure or anything like that to improve, enhance it, and make sure that you close the gap and for the safe of carriage of the goods. Sure. Yeah, that's my my advice. Yeah,
David, any views on what who should be? Would you rather see a slightly different percentage somewhere else?
No, I think that's rather what I would expect to see. And again, it is steered by the current trend of misdeclaration.
Yeah. Captain Lee?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think all of us has got a role to play if we want to prevent the fire.
Yeah.
Carriers, yes, to your customer, enhance your SOP, IMO, yes, is very slow, but I think if you want to get there, it should be one of the main vehicles to get there. Sadly to say, flag state, I think not very much they can do as just single flag.
Yeah.
They influence IMO. And of course, the shippers is what we have been talking about. I think all the panelists here, including yourself, agree. And you are in the investigation board, so you should know how many of the past fire incidents are caused by shippers.
Yeah, absolutely. Captain Vibas?
Yes, I definitely agree with it. I think putting it all on shippers, though, is a little bit unfair because it is not in the natural interest to resolve the problem, as I discussed. There has to be something which has got to be taken up by the owners, carriers, as well as IMO. And I'll give you an example. I mean, we discussed about IMO and regulatory bodies. That may take some time. But for the owners, for example, they can make it, the carriers, they can collaborate with the shippers. They can incentivize. They can think about making it simpler, removing the surcharge for dangerous goods, right? Why motivate them to commit fraud?
Right.
So you think of these ways, innovative ways in trying to actually solve the problem. At the end of the day, though I have preached about vetting and regulations, that's not going to change behavior. You have to have trust and transparency in the industry, and people have to understand that it's not just about stuffing the goods in the container, it's also about transporting it across the sea.
The journey and the
when people can get killed and you can damage the environment.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to prevent rather than try and cure.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, and I really like the summation by Captain Vibas on trying to. I would have liked to see a slightly different percentage, though. And again, in all fairness, when we say shippers, we're not saying the shippers should solve the problem. We need to solve the problem with the shippers. I think that's what the intent is. But the IMO is made up of member states. The IMO may not be the driving change, and these are issues which we're discussing for the last 1 hour, is the commercial decisions which have allowed things to progress to where we are. So naturally, the entire ecosystem of the logistics supply chain needs to play a part. And as the audience would have heard, we've tried to understand what the pain points are. There is no doubt everybody needs to play a part, but the industry is complex. It is competitive. We need to recognize what are the pain points. And unless we recognize those bottom lines, we may not be able to be in a position to solve them. So with that, I do apologize to our audience for not being able to take the remaining questions due to the paucity of time. And I'd wholeheartedly thank my panelists for their time today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to sit and chat with you here. With that, I'd like to thank the audience for logging in whichever time zone you are in, and hope that you have a safe day and a safe night, and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Kunal and our esteemed panelists for your insights and a most interesting discussion. And that brings us to the end of Plenary 1. Do join us later for Plenary 2, where our keynote speakers and panelists will focus on rethinking crew training in a VUCA world at 5 p.m. Singapore time. We would also like to get your views on today's session. We hope that you can take a few minutes to complete the feedback form that will pop up later when you exit this webinar. And last but not least, you can take part in our quiz to win an Amazon gift voucher worth Singapore dollars 50. To qualify, just scan the QR code or click on the link posted in the chat window at the bottom of your screen. Answer all the questions correctly, and you could be one of the lucky winners randomly drawn per session. Good luck! And on that note, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again at 5 p.m. for our next plenary session. Goodbye.